Wait for them to connect. I see connecting to audio, and away we go. Hey, everybody, welcome to another rendition, episode, whatever you want to call it, of Coffee and Code Platoon. I'm your host, Greg Drobny, and joining me as always, the person who makes all of this happen, Kayla. Thank you for being here. And we're going to launch right into it. As I've said in the past with these are pretty casual, but we do want to just launch into this and get going. It's casual in the sense that you can ask any questions you have if you're attending. Please don't hesitate to type into the chat or, raise your hand and speak on camera, not be on camera. Don't feel obligated to be on camera, but by all means, ask questions however you feel comfortable doing so. But we can get going right away. One thing that Kayla reminded me that we do want to bring up right away is our new application. Is it an application? I don't know if that's the right word. Scholarship eligibility form that we can let you fill out and kind of determine whether or not you're eligible for scholarships. This is something that Code Platoon has done since its inception. We've offered scholarships to students to reduce the cost of attending the program, either by 100% or very close to 100%. We make Code Platoon affordable. But a question that often comes up is whether or not someone qualifies for a scholarship. We don't determine that entirely until you're actually accepted, but we have kind of come up with a new way of addressing that. And it's this form that Kayla has put in, or it will be putting in the chat, that you can fill out and basically determine with a little bit more accuracy what you're eligible for and things like that. So the question that was just asked in the chat, do the scholarships cover just the tuition? How does the housing work for in-person attendance? So yes, scholarships are just for tuition. We don't, and that's where it, obviously a VA benefit, something like GI Bill or VRNE, is superior in that way, in that they're giving you a living stipend. We're not able to go quite that far with our scholarships, despite the fact that our scholarships are extremely generous. Again, between 80 and 100% of the tuition covered for scholarships. In terms of housing, if you're attending in person, keep in mind GI Bill is an option. But for in-person, if you want to attend in person rather than attending remotely and you're on a scholarship, usually the way that works is to network with other incoming students to work out some kind of sharing plan where you have a temporary, like Marriott does those temporary stay hotel type things where it's an extended stay, but it's not quite the same as a hotel. Or you can find a little bit longer term option like B&B, depending on who you can partner with, other members of your class. But that's not something that we have we don't have like an official place that Code Platoon students stay. And the reality is that we don't have enough students to warrant something like that. We're not a big enough school to have like an actual dormitory or something like that. So it's kind of something you would rely on just networking with your fellow incoming students and the outgoing students to get a good idea of where the best place to stay is.
As someone who lived in Chicago until fairly recently, subleasing apartments is another really good way to go about it. There's a lot of groups on Facebook for subleasing apartments, finding roommates, finding more temporary apartments. That's all something I highly recommend and that I've heard in-person students do as well.
Absolutely. And the cool thing about Code Platoon is that it's a small enough network that when you get accepted to our program, you're immediately connected to our network via the Slack channels and things like that. And you can start networking and meet, like Kayla said, outgoing students, people who just attended, maybe they have some insights. They would have way better insights than even the staff who lives in the Chicago area because they live there permanently. So their understanding where you can stay temporarily is a little bit skewed. So it's kind of one of those things we figure out people figure out from cohort to cohort, and they just kind of figure it out at the grassroots level, for lack of a better way of putting that. Do you have any other questions? And Kayla did put the scholarship eligibility form in the chat for those tuning in. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube at a later date, it is hosted on our site, right, Kayla? Yeah.
You can find it very easily by going to our scholarship page, codeplatoon.org/scholarships.
Yeah. So if you're watching this at a later time on YouTube, which a lot of people do, and that's great, just go to our webpage, look under the scholarship page, like Kayla said, and you'll find that. So welcome for those of you, if you came in a little bit late. Again, we're jumping into this pretty casually. If you have questions, don't hesitate to either say them or type them into the chat. Kayla, what's a common question? Hit me with another common question. Maybe somebody has already, and maybe that will break the ice a little bit.
All right. What is the difference between DevOps engineering and software engineering?
Ooh, we're starting with the hard questions. Like Kayla's putting the screws to me here to make sure I'm thinking correctly. So this is a little bit tricky question because the question was, what's the difference between DevOps and full stack software engineering? It's a tricky question in one way, in that DevOps is a fairly new field. And so a lot of the people who have historically done DevOps roles started out as software engineers. That's one of the reasons why our DevOps program is offered only as an evening and weekends model, is because most of the interest we have are from people who are already working in the industry. They already have careers. They don't want to give those up necessarily. They just want more training. And so DevOps is working more towards cloud implementation. It's the implementation of a app or a website into the cloud and maintaining that. I've heard it told to me the best way to think about the differences there are between a creator and a maintainer. A DevOps engineer is a little bit more of a maintainer, making sure processes are running smoothly for a client, whereas a software engineer is a little bit more on the creative end of things. So that kind of lends towards why we do have some good resources from some alumni, some quotes rather on our DevOps page that people can read. I highly encourage you to do so. I think we've written a couple of blog articles on it, if I'm not mistaken. Someone has, probably Kayla's one of them. And so please peruse our site and look at these. And this is another area, though, that I encourage people to really dig into and look for multiple resources. Don't just trust one person. Like, you may know somebody who works in software and they say, this is what a DevOps engineer does, and this is what a software engineer does. They may be entirely accurate, and that answer might be perfectly true in their organization, but it might not be true in a different organization. That role might look a little bit different at one place versus another. If you're on this team at Microsoft versus this team at JP Morgan and Chase, those roles could be vastly different. Well, not vastly, but they could have a different scope. It also depends on how big the team is that you're working with. If you're working on a team of 20 and you're a DevOps engineer, your role is going to be more defined than if you're working on a team of, say, 3 or 4 people, where you're going to end up doing a lot of things. And that's the case in any role, in any aspect of business, by the way. In a small, Kayla can tell you, in a small startup organization like Code Platoon, we do a lot of different things. Everybody does a lot of different things. Whereas if you're in a bigger corporation, your roles are a little bit more defined and you're going to stay in your lane a lot more often. But in general, like I said, the biggest difference, I think, for people coming into this new and not knowing really a lot of the terminology, think of DevOps in the military context. The analogy I use a lot is, imagine a person who's working with a defense contractor to make the perfect tank or the perfect airplane. They're working with the defense contractor to make sure that airplane is perfect for the people who are using it, whereas the engineer is the person who's from the ground up. They're designing the very base level and coming up with a lot of creative ways of doing a lot of creative things. So there's a lot of leeway there, but I think that's a general way of looking at it.
Thank you, Greg. For those of you who are here, I would love if you could just sound off in the chat. Have you started an application with Code Platoon? And if so, which program were you looking at? Just so we can give you the best information for where you are.
And something that came up before, so one we've got not yet. And one thing I want to encourage everyone here to do, something Kayla reminded me of before we started this, is start your application as quickly as possible. For one thing, the first part of the application is very simple, very straightforward. It'll take you 10 minutes. And there's no commitment there. You're not committed to anything by submitting part 1 of the application. But what that does is it generates all the steps necessary and the resources you'll need to start on step 2, which will take you some time. Even if you're somewhat experienced in this, it's not something you're going to knock out in just an afternoon. It will take you a little bit of time to do. So we want you to be sure to get started on that early, because we can accept you early, but we also want you to know full well what you are getting into. So Amy says, I have done part 1 and working on part 2. So Amy knows exactly what I'm talking about. Depending on your skill level, depending on your experience, this could take longer. It could take, maybe you learn everything you need to know in a week and you're done with it. Maybe it takes a month. But the sooner you get started on it, the more you start to realize like what is involved and what this is all about. Part of our application process for those, coming into this brand new, we want people to know full well what they're getting into with Code Platoon. So we offer a lot of resources and a lot of ways to explore this before the program even starts. So there's a number of things you can do at Code Platoon completely free of charge. The only thing it costs you is your time just to get going and get started learning on this path to learning the skills you need to be successful later. Any questions based on any of that before we invent some other questions? Any questions about anything? I mean, that's what we're here for. It's coffee and Code Platoon. Anybody have any
Hi
coffee?
there.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kenny.
My question is odd. I remember seeing an application that's you need to be 180 days before exiting the military. I'm still in the National Guard and my contract doesn't finish until 2027. Is there any way to join Code Platoon before my ETS day, or am I just kind of like you have to wait another year?
So there's a lot of background noises. It's kind of hard to hear a little bit, but I think what you're asking is you're in the National Guard, but you were seeing the requirement about the 180 days. 180 days has specifically to do with skill bridge or CSP, and as it's known in the Army. Are you active Guard, or are you just Guard, like regular National Guard? You're drilling on the weekend?
Weekend warrior.
Okay, cool. No, that's great. So you can still do the program then. The reason I ask that is because the 180-day requirement is for people on active duty. And what that is about is for people who want to do a skill bridge program or CSP, as it's known in the Army, career skills path, because I'm an Army guy myself. The Army likes to do things different. The rest of DoD calls it skill bridge. The Army calls it CSP. But that is for people who are in their last 180 days of service. And what that allows people to do is to take part in our program and basically do nothing. They don't have to report for duty. As long as their command signs off on it, they don't have to show up for duty. You would need that to do our program on active duty, because there's no possible way you could do our program on active duty. It takes too much time. But for someone in the National Guard who's just doing the weekend drills, things like that, that's not a big deal. We have people do that all the time, because we have people who get out of active duty and they go into Guard or reserves, and they end up going through Code Platoon. They might need to take a Friday off, once during the course of the 15-week cohort, because some drill weekends, as you know, are 3 days instead of 2. So what we work around that, because again, all of our students are military family people. So we're going to have a lot of National Guard and Reserve people. So yeah, I encourage you to absolutely pursue this and try to attend. Now, I will caveat everything I just said, as long as, and because I've had this question come up, every Guard, every Reserve unit does their 2-week long drill training, whatever, during the year. If that falls in the middle of a cohort, that's a problem, right? Because our cohorts are 10 to 12-hour days, at least 5 days a week. So 2 weeks out of 15 weeks of missing 10-hour days is a lot of time to be missed. And so that would be very, very difficult to keep up with. But as long as that 2-week time does not fall, or you can get that excused from your unit, then it's fine. Your regular weekend drilling is not a problem for us. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, but in that case, how does because I've seen other programs, they use a GI Bill and they have like a housing allowance. Does Code Platoon do the same thing, or how does that work?
So Yes and no. So the GI Bill itself only applies to programs like ours if the student attends in person. If you are an in-person attendance in Chicago, then yes, you can use the GI Bill. Yes, you will get that living stipend. If you cannot attend in person, the GI Bill won't fund it at all, in which case we would have to look for scholarship opportunities for you, which you would most certainly qualify for at least one, or, I mean, if you're an active guard person, yeah, we have scholarships that would apply to you. But unless you attend in person, the GI Bill won't work. The only other VA option that does work that for right now, and I'll get to that other possibility in a minute. For right now, the only other VA option is VR&E, vocational rehab and employment. If you are in the VA system and if you have a disability rating that isn't really all that high, I think it's anything really over about 10 or 20%, you can qualify for something called VR&E, which will pay for you to do this program remotely as well as in person. So that is another option. Now, the other option that historically for about 5 years worked for VA was something called Vet Tech. Yes, VR&E does pay the living stipend. To answer that question real briefly before I move on to Vet Tech, because that popped up. Yes, VR&E will pay the living stipend. VR&E is a fantastic option. I will highly, strongly encourage you to apply for VR&E. And I will tell you right now, there's one downside and one downside only to VR&E. It requires meeting with a counselor at the VA. That in itself is not a downside. What the downside is that the VA doesn't have very many counselors. And so it's kind of hard to get in to see one. And you might contact the VA and they might say, yeah, you can come see a counselor 2 months from now. Or depending on your area, maybe they have one ready to go 2 weeks from now. It just kind of depends on where you are and how many VR&E counselors they have. But the downside, the one possible downside there is that you do have to meet with a counselor. It's not like the GI Bill where you just apply online and you have that benefit. You have to meet with a counselor, present your case of why you want to use this benefit. But if you can get it, it's great because they'll pay the tuition, they will pay you a living stipend, and they'll buy you a laptop, which is pretty great. So fantastic option. Again, look into it, submit your application on the VA's website, and then wait to hear back from the VA. Now, on to the other thing, Vet Tech. Vet Tech was an initiative at the VA for 5 years, up until very recently, up until a month ago, basically, that was specifically designed for schools like ours. That program came to an end. It doesn't exist anymore. But the reason I bring it up is because there is a bill currently in Congress that would reestablish Vet Tech, kind of a similar thing. We just don't know, and it's probably going to pass. It's a weird situation where it's most likely going to pass, but we have to wait for Congress to pass it and wait to see when the VA is going to implement it. So we can't count on that right now. For our upcoming cohorts, I would love to tell you, yes, this is going to pass and you're going to have that option available as a benefit. We don't know. And I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that, it's super hopeful that it'll be here by October. We honestly don't know. And I would feel bad saying anything other than that. So those are kind of the VA options that exist. Outside of the VA, again, we have scholarships and they're very generous. They typically run between 80 and 100% of the tuition cover. Does that answer? I covered a lot of ground there, so I feel like I might have word vomited a lot. So if anybody has follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ask them.
How much is the living stipend if you do go in person? Because I do stay in the city, and that would be perfect for me to come in person.
The last I checked, so last year, 2023, it was around 2,200. And I know everything the VA got a pay bump as of 2024. I don't know exactly what that went to, but I know that it was like 2,200 and change. Like, you know how the VA works. It's always some odd numbers, like $2,236.52 or something like that. I don't know. I would have to Google to see what it went up to. My guess is that it's probably in the 2,300 to 2,400 range for Chicago, but I would have to Google to be sure. But it's somewhere in there. I'm not far off if I'm, it's somewhere around $2,300 is my guess.
Honestly, how do I get started?
For applying to Code Platoon, you get started by simply starting step 1 of our application. In fact, I think Kayla can probably throw that in the chat really quick while I answer. I'll tell you what, I'm going to answer this next question, and then we'll get that part 1 of the application thrown in the chat. The next question is, how does Code Platoon determine the percentage of tuition coverage for the scholarships? So it's based on which. Simple answer is, we're going to get you the highest level scholarship we can. We have a lot of companies and interested parties who donate money for scholarships. We have to allocate that money as the dictates of those specific scholarships. So whether they be for one demographic versus another, we honor whatever that money was allocated for. But if you qualify for 100% scholarship, we're going to get that for you. We're not nickeling and diming the opposite direction. If anything, we err on the side of giving you more and erring towards giving you as much as possible. Now, one quick caveat to that. Let's imagine a situation where you only got an 80% scholarship. Even in that case, that remaining 20% of the tuition is not due up front. It's not even due upon graduation. I've seen numerous students set up a payment plan with our finance department and say, hey, can I make payments? Can I start paying on this once I get a job? We want to make this affordable. We do everything we possibly can to make sure that Code Platoon is affordable to the student and to make sure that tuition is not a barrier for attendance. That living stipend component is another matter, and we're not there yet, but in terms of the tuition itself, we do everything possible we can to make sure that that is not a barrier for attendance. Yeah, the application part 1 is linked in the chat now. Kenny, you were asking about that. Just click on that. Again, the first part of the application is very simple, very straightforward, won't take you long at all. Once you fill that out, you'll get some stuff auto-generated to you over the next 30, 40 minutes that will give you resources necessary to start on part 2 and to start learning this stuff. And please, for everyone listening, don't think that our application process is just a bunch of hoops to jump through. We are giving you the skills necessary to be successful in this industry, right? The things that you are learning through the application process are all applicable to what you will do as a software engineer. They are not hoops to jump through to get to a school. They are the training path. They are part of what you will be doing. They're fundamental to what you'll be doing. And it helps you kind of analyze for yourself, like, is this what I want to be doing? Because it very well may be that you start into the application process and say, this isn't for me. That's cool. That's cool. That's why we offer it. We don't want you to get into something and get into it later and go, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. Question, can we use the Illinois National Guard grant? That's a good question. I'm going to have to speak with our enrollment specialist because I don't know for sure on that one. Let me answer this with kind of a general philosophy. Code Platoon is all about taking any kind of money that people want to give to us. We're not the barrier. What I mean by that is if some organization like the Illinois National Guard wants to give us money for tuition, we're probably not going to reject that. But whether or not the Illinois National Guard would pay for somebody to go through Code Platoon, that's the real question. So generally speaking, with all things related to military and how Code Platoon works with it, we're on the flexible side. We're the ones who say, yeah, we can probably make this work and do this and that and the other. On the other side of things, on the DoD and the National Guard side of things, that's where it gets a little trickier, whether or not they will be willing to pay for certain things. I will have to ask our enrollment. So email me, and speaking of which, I'll put my email in the chat. Just so it's not greg@codeplatoon.org for those who happen to be watching this on YouTube. Please email me any question you have. But Kenny, please email me that same question so that I can loop in our VA and enrollment specialist, because she would probably have a more robust answer to that. Are there CP resources, Code Platoon resources that help place graduates? Yes. Short answer, yes. If there are, can you speak on that a little bit, please? Absolutely. That's, I would say, something that we take very seriously at Code Platoon and is kind of part of the general ethos of where Code Platoon came from. So just a little bit of background. Rod Levy, the man who started Code Platoon, started this organization with the premise of addressing veteran unemployment through giving viable hard skills to veterans. You know, not just saying, hey, I want to get veterans jobs, but actually leading them down a path that gave them skills. But part of that philosophy, that general philosophy, is that we measure success based on graduates starting their career. We don't measure our success on graduates graduating. That's not our marker of success. Code Platoon measures success by saying, we've got this many people launching their careers into tech. So we have a career services team that begins working with all of our graduates upon graduation. And it is a top-down and bottom-up effort. And what I mean by that, top-down, we're working constantly to foster relationships with organizations and businesses that will hire our graduates. So we've worked with, and if you go to our corporate partners page on our website, you can see we've worked with some very large companies, from Accenture to Motorola Solutions, DRW, JP Morgan Chase, Chicago Trading Company, Granger. We've worked with some very large organizations who trust us and want to hire our graduates. Travelers is a recent one that we've worked very extensively with, hired a lot of our graduates. Exxon Mobil has hired a lot of our graduates. So we're working to build these relationships with companies to help hire our graduates. But then we're also, from the bottom up, we're working with the individual. And that means everything from, obviously, the skills necessary to get these jobs. That's hugely important. But then how do they transfer those, not just those skills, but their military experience? Like, how do you write a resume? How do you put down what you did in the military and help show that to an employer? How do you convey that in an interview? So we're doing interview coaching, we're doing resume coaching, we're doing job lead, all of those things. And I think personally, one of the things that sets Code Platoon apart is that we're the only coding bootcamp out there that's exclusively about doing this for the military community. Of course, anybody can go to a full stack academy, anybody can go to Flatiron, you know, any number of these other places, but they're going to deal with, you know, the veteran in the group is going to be 1 out of 100. Here, it's our entire student body. The military community is the entire student body. So when you get that resume advice, and when you're working with career services, you're working with people who deal exclusively with exactly your situation, right? Someone who's coming out of the military, trying to transfer those skills and to show employers this is valuable. What I did was valuable. And the employers that we work with, that's why we work with them, is because they see the value in exactly that. So yes, our career services is a huge part of what we do. If you look on, if you want to go do a deeper dive into this, Kayla just put the page on career services into the chat. But also, if you're on YouTube, number one, in general, we have hundreds of hours of content on our YouTube channel. So please dig around on there if you want to do a deep dive. But also, I did an interview with our career services team a while back. I guess it's been about a year now. Watch, it's probably like 2.5 years ago. I lose track of time. I'm getting old. But we did an interview with career services where they do explain a little bit more in detail what that means. So you can do a much deeper dive into what it is that career services does exactly and how detailed they get. But it's a great team. It's a very motivated team, and they love helping people. How does the part 2 of the interview work? So part 2, I wouldn't necessarily call it an interview. So there's 3 components for part 2. Number 1, first and foremost, most important, are the coding challenges you must complete for part 2. This goes back to what I was saying a minute ago. These are not hoops to jump through. These are fundamental aspects of the skill of a software engineer. So as you're learning these things, this is exactly what you will be doing on a job interview in the future as a software engineer. You will be given, in a lot of software engineering roles, you'll be given coding challenges on a site very similar to where we send you to do the coding challenges for Code Platoon. We're just doing it at a much lower level. The difference is we're giving you the resources for free that you need to know to be able to do well on those. So we have an intro to coding program completely free of charge. You can start it right now. You can go on our website, start intro to coding, start learning anytime, completely free, costs nothing other than your time. So that's the first component, is coding challenges. You want to do as well as you can on those. Second component is a few essays that you have to do. And a lot of people get freaked out when they hear essays. Don't be. These are essays more to explain your commitment. If I were to ask you, how are you going to budget your time knowing that Code Platoon is a massive time requirement? That's really what you need to be thinking of when you're thinking of essays. These aren't college level essays. We're asking you to write a dissertation on how JavaScript started or something like that. Nothing that crazy. Very basic essays, kind of explaining your commitment to time. The third thing is a video. You do need to make a video, and that is kind of walking through how you solved some of the coding challenges. I will tell all of you up front that I have never seen a single person denied entry into Code Platoon because they didn't have a good video. You do need to do it, and there's a reason why we do it, but don't be intimidated by making a video about your coding challenges. It's pretty basic. It's pretty straightforward. The coding challenges, the coding challenges, the coding challenges. That's where the real effort should be focused on, because again, you're learning the skills necessary. So start learning the skills, and then you can start working on those coding challenges slowly. It is not a timed endeavor. So if it takes you the next several weeks or months to do the coding challenges, that's fine. Completely fine. You are not on the clock. You can go look at the coding challenges right now. You don't need to do it in under 2 hours or anything like that. Take as much time as you need.
Before we move on to Owen's question, Greg, can we talk a little bit about the resources available to help prepare someone who's more of a beginner or may not have any coding experience to prepare for the coding challenges?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And that's a great question. Thanks for reminding me. The first thing, like I said, is intro to coding. And you can go, if you go on our website right now and look at the top banner, it says admissions prep. You can see intro to coding. You can sign up, you can start that class immediately. And it's, again, free of charge. But in addition to that, let's say you're a complete beginner, you're like, I don't even know where to start, right? Well, start by signing up for that. But also, we have an entire YouTube playlist of an instructor going through that very same resource. So the last time we did an intro to coding live, which means a class for that same resource, we recorded it all and put it on YouTube. We will run intro to coding live again. We're kind of revamping that a little bit. So I don't know when exactly we'll be doing that. But until then, we have it all recorded, put up on YouTube in 2 different languages. So we have a whole series for JavaScript and we have a whole series for Python. I do encourage you, because this is what instructors tell me to tell people all the time, stick with one language. Don't try to learn JavaScript one day, Python the next day. Although you can do our application challenges in either language, stick with one. And whichever one makes the most sense to you. If you're brand new to this, probably JavaScript usually, but stick with one language, start learning that. Again, we have YouTube playlists that go through all of this. Also, in addition, we have a Slack channel. All you have to do is email me and say, hey, I want to be included in this Slack channel. And that's a place where you can ask questions and people will help you with this same curriculum. So there are teaching assistants, there are fellow alumni who are monitoring this channel who will help walk you through some of the steps for intro to coding if you're brand new to this. So we have a number of free resources available to those who are starting out brand new to this. Like, where do I even begin? We've got all of that. Can you send the intro to coding Python playlist? I think, yep, Kayla
He
just
over-anticipated me by 1 second.
nice timing, both of you. That was great
If I
timing.
was a smarter person, I would have it pulled up before we start this, but I'm not. So there you go.
I have it saved on my homepage, so I'd be able, yeah, because I get asked, it's one of the most common questions I get asked. So it's become so common that I almost forget about it in situations like this because I'm constantly sending it to people via email. Back to Owen's question. Is there an avenue to seek out graduates of Code Platoon to discuss career opportunities and what their process was like, such as maintaining a clearance? Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. Semi-longer answer, I would encourage you to check out our YouTube channel and some of our alumni stories. And also, we've got, let me think. Kana's Code Platoon journey is a great place to start. So we had someone who was both a veteran and a military spouse. Kana was an Air Force, a former Air Force, what are Air Force people calling themselves these days? Airmen, airwomen? I'm not sure. I feel vastly ignorant all of a sudden, not remembering what Air Force personnel, Army folks are soldiers, right? Anyway, Kana, My Code Platoon Journey by Kana on YouTube. She did a week by week breakdown of what her experience was like going through Code Platoon, which was very, very helpful. A lot of people have found that resource very helpful. But I've also done several interviews lately with alumni talking about their experience coming to Code Platoon. So those are good resources on our YouTube page. But yes, to answer your question directly, we could certainly connect you with alumni. And, email me specifically, greg@codeplatoon.org, and we can talk a little bit about what your background is. And that way I can try to find someone who matches that more closely, because we've had people coming from all branches, all types, like everything from people who did one tour, 3 years in the military, got out, all the way up to 25-year veterans who got out. And then, and these are very different experiences. So I would want to match you up with people who kind of had a similar experience, whether it's branch or MOS or anything like that. So yeah, email me, greg@codeplatoon.org, and we can discuss some of that. Hey, Owen, I can see you.
Yeah. Would I be able to just stick to the end of the call so that way I'm not wasting everybody else's time and just discuss more of the details pertaining to myself?
Oh, you can do that now, or you can do, unless, if somebody else has a question, you can ask more detailed questions now if you'd like.
Yeah, I just want to get into my background and see if there's any alumni that I could talk to, because I'm not very familiar with the process of like transferring my clearance over to the civilian sector, as well as just finding work to the specific area that I'll be working in, which is St. Louis.
Sure. So with clearance, I'm sorry, I didn't get to that part of the question yet. Here's my general thoughts on the clearance question. And this is probably what you will hear from alumni doing the same thing. So my answer is not going to be too far off. It depends. It depends on the company that you go to work for. And the reason I say that is because if you go to work for, let's say you're leaving, what branch of the service are you in? I thought I saw a Marine.
Yeah, I'm in the Marine Corps.
Okay. I thought it was kind of hard to see totally, but yeah. I thought I saw a Marine Corps. Okay, cool. So let's say you're leaving the Marine Corps and you're like, hey, I want to go, I've got this job offer from McDonnell Douglas, big defense contractor. They are going to handle that security clearance stuff, like, because they do it so much, right? McDonnell Douglas is going to be like, we've got this. Don't worry. We've got it taken care of. You might also go to work for a banking or finance industry. You might go to work for JP Morgan Chase after coming through Code Platoon, because you're like, wow, this opportunity is really cool, and I didn't even consider it. And the people at JP Morgan Chase, maybe they don't care. And maybe they offer you a salary that makes you not care either about that security clearance. Like maybe you do, maybe you don't. But what I'm getting at is that it depends on the company you go to work for, of whether or not, first of all, how they would handle that. Second of all, whether or not it would even matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And like I said, it really just depends. Like if you're, dead set on working in the defense industry, then yes, a clearance is a big deal. But if you're not, if you're open to other opportunities beyond the defense industry, there's a lot of places where it won't matter. And we have a lot of graduates who have gone into roles where you would be shocked at their starting salary. And they were top secret level holding people, and they don't care anymore because they're doing really cool stuff. I know I'm thinking of one graduate specifically who was a special forces soldier who went to work for JP Morgan Chase. And like, they don't care that they don't have a security clearance anymore. I promise. So, but yeah, email, like I said, email me after and I can connect you. In fact, one of our main instructors right now, Francisco Avila, in fact, I just did an interview with him. He's a former Marine infantryman, and he's now one of the main lead instructors at Code Platoon. He'd be happy to talk to you about any number of things. We have several. In fact, the person who wrote our intro to coding curriculum was a Marine artilleryman. And the guy who used to run Intro to Coding, the live version until now, in fact, he's on the JavaScript playlist. So the JavaScript Intro to Coding, Charles is a Marine veteran of Fallujah, as a matter of fact. Great guy, mountain of a guy. He's like 7 feet tall. I don't know. Love Charles. He's a great guy, but he's huge. I met him in person. I was like, I had no idea you were this big. But anyway, that's a complete aside. But yeah, we've got several Marines who would be more than happy to talk to you. But yeah, email me after this if you want to connect with them, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you more about any of this, and I can talk to you more as well.
Thanks, Greg.
You bet. Best branch. Sorry, continue. I will say this, as a former Army person, I will say 2 things about the Marine Corps. Number 1, you guys have hands down the best marketing. Like, your commercials make me still want to join the Marine. I see Marine commercials come up. I'm like, I'm only 50. I could do this, right? They make me believe, right? They also tend to train people to shoot better. I admit this. I fully admit this. They do. They do a fantastic job of training marksmanship. Any other questions? It's a cult. It also is a cult. Yes. And also they have a very, yes. I think you're onto something, Kenny.
We have 2 Marines, a National Guard. What else?
Who else is
here?
represented? No Coast Guard. Occasionally, we've had a Space Force person come through Code Platoon. I'd like to point that out to everybody, which they automatically get deference for the coolest name. I mean, all the rest of us can talk about history all we want, but you just say Space Force, and it's kind of like this. Like, I win. I'm the Space Force.
That's our new advertising message. 1 person thought we were preferable to Space Force so far.
They're called Guardians. So good. Yeah, I mean, whoever thought that this was a real thing, like Space Force? As a kid, I would have never imagined I'd live to see it. So, any other questions about anything at all? Can the coding challenges in part 2 of the application be done in either Python or JavaScript? Yes, they absolutely can. So whichever language you're most comfortable in, stick with that. We've had students, I had someone ask me once if they could do alternating JavaScript or Python. I was like, yeah, I guess you can. I don't know why you'd want to, but you can do them in either language. Yes.
Clarification there, if you're applying to the DevOps and Cloud Engineering program, that is Python for the coding challenges. But if you're applying to software engineering, which I believe is what you had said earlier you were applying to, that is either you can do JavaScript or Python.
And so a caveat on that, and that's, Kayla, you might not have even heard this, so I apologize, but we have actually kind of softened on the Python only for DevOps. So if you happen to submit one in JavaScript and you knocked it out of the park, they'll still look at you.
Oh man, I'm out of the loop. Thank you.
I learned that the hard way too. I said that, I don't know where we were recently, I said it and someone said, no, actually, no, that's not quite true. I don't know. Yeah, but do understand that DevOps, like Kayla's partially correct, and it's just important to understand DevOps is maybe evaluated at a little bit higher level. So even if you were doing JavaScript, like, you do need to submit a pretty solid application because it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different skill set.
Python as a whole is more useful for DevOps engineering than JavaScript. Like, both of them are used, but the backend languages get a little more use in DevOps.
Yes. Where do you apply for the cloud engineering? I didn't see it, only said full stack and DevOps. So cloud engineering is part of DevOps. So that's one title, DevOps and cloud engineering. It's not a separate. We only have 2 curriculums. There's 2 different curriculums. One is full stack and one is DevOps and cloud engineering. So I'm sorry if that got a little bit confusing. I recommend if you're brand new to this, just as a general, like I recommend starting with full stack. First of all, that's the only one you can do full-time immersive. DevOps is evening and weekend only. If you already are involved in this industry and you kind of know, what you're getting into, we can have that conversation. If you're brand new to it, start learning full stack because it's going to be useful either way. So even if you eventually say, hey, I really think this DevOps thing is for me, learning full stack and applying that path is probably the best way to go if you're a brand new beginner. Does
Also,
the remote
DevOps
have,
program is only remote, and I remember you said you wanted to attend in person in Chicago,
Yeah.
so that's another reason that full stack immersive would be right for you.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
Oh, no. That's a good point. Does the remote cohort have required hours of the day to be available, or is it flexible time? Yes to the first part of that question. So all of our cohorts are synchronous. They're together. So you are doing everything at scheduled times with other people in your cohort. This isn't like a college class where you log on and do the work whenever you get a chance. These are set times. So whether you are remote or sitting in our classroom in Chicago, you're taking part in the same thing at the same time, doing all the same projects, working on the same things because there's a lot of things in software engineering that do involve teamwork. Pair programming is huge. You do need to learn to do these things with other people, and you wouldn't be able to do that if we were having people doing this at different hours. Plus, there's so much to do in a short period of time. Our 15-week, our boot camp model is, the idea is to give you like a bachelor's degree worth of knowledge in 15 weeks. So the only way you can do that is to do all day, every day. And the only way you can do it in an evening and weekend model is to have set class times that are still fairly intense. And there is a VA related reason why that is, by the way. If someone looks at our hours for our evening and weekend cohorts and they think, wow, this is still quite a bit. The reason for that is because it is not a part-time program. You notice that it's called evening and weekends. It's not part-time. That's very specific for VA benefits. So if you ended up using something like VR&E or this future version of vet tech or something like that, the VA classifies that as a full-time program. That's huge for benefit purposes for everybody who's worked with the VA. Let's see. Is there a way to view full stack and then transfer to DevOps, or how do I further myself after the program? Yeah, we've had a few students who have gone through. In fact, I think we had a couple of students out of the last cohort who literally like graduated full stack program and started DevOps like a week later or something. Wasn't that the case?
Before they graduated, they wanted to roll right in, and we let them roll.
Yeah.
Do like 2 weeks of overlap.
Yeah. So we had a couple of students who rolled right into DevOps because of the same. They wanted to continue on and continue learning. So yes, it is possible. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy. That's a lot to learn. But it would also depend on how the cohorts line up. So our evening and weekends cohorts, we don't offer anywhere near as often because they take 28 weeks, right? So whether or not that lines up with the end of your full stack program or not, you'd have to look at the schedule. But yes, you can absolutely graduate full stack and go into DevOps later. In fact, that seems to be the primary demographic of people who go through DevOps is people who are already full stack software engineers. But a VR&E or a scholarship wouldn't cover that, would it? VR&E is a question mark on that. Scholarship is another matter because scholarships are internal. So Code Platoon decides on the scholarships. So if we, in a situation like that, yeah, we would treat it the same as if you were any other student. That wouldn't change anything to do with scholarship. If need be, we get you another scholarship. But VR&E is another matter. That's a big question mark, because basically you would have to convince the VA and the VA counselor, the VR&E counselor you're working with, you would have to convince them, hey, I'm going to do this immersive 15-week program, and then I'm going to roll over into a 28-week program. Like, if you can convince a VA counselor to let you do that, awesome. And we will back you. We will absolutely support that. But again, it's a question mark whether or not a VA counselor would agree to that. So I can. Hey, if you can, then awesome, because we like VRNE a lot, and this is something we're pushing for a lot more of, because VRNE is a great way to go through our program. It's a fantastic funding option. The problem is, again, like I said earlier, is getting awareness out there that, number one, it exists. A lot of veterans aren't even aware that VRNE exists. Once they realize it exists, sometimes it's in this process of like, well, we can get you in to see a counselor, but you can't see a counselor until 3 months from now. Again, that depends on your area. If you're in St. Louis versus Los Angeles, that might look very different. I don't know. The counselors in my area are fairly readily accessible. I'm in Northern Colorado, but the counselor in your area might take longer. So just be aware of that going in and try to start that process as early as possible. A quick note on that too, a caveat on, because I think this is important to note in this context. Everyone paying attention to all of these funding questions and the application questions, you can be accepted to Code Platoon well before the funding question is worked out. So don't wait. And I say that because I almost always, every cohort we have someone who wants to use VRNE, and at the end of their application, they're like, okay, I'm going to go apply for VRNE now. And I tell everyone, and I've told people this for several years, apply to VRNE now. Start that application process now. Let that, wait on that. We don't need it. We don't need it to accept you. We can get you accepted, enrolled, everything before we even agree on scholarship, funding, anything. So start the processes sooner rather than later, because we don't want you to get is caught in a situation where time runs out. We want you to be able to use these benefits. We love it when people can use their benefits. It helps us out. It helps you out. It's a win for all of us. You have to be a veteran with at least 10 to 20% disability. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is the threshold is pretty low. 20% is not a lot. And I'm not here to ask people what their disability rating is. It's not my place. But generally speaking, most veterans qualify for 20%. So, if you haven't started that process yet, that's a whole other animal to tackle. Do that through the VA. But if you have a 10 to 20% disability rating, get a meeting with a VRNE counselor and talk to them about this. Yeah, VRNE, Kenny, the vocational rehabilitation and employment. The application for that is on the VA's page. If you're in the Guard, you can still use it. It is technically possible. Do I have to be out of the military? Technically, if you're in the Guard, you can still be in the VA. I know this because I was active duty and then I went into the reserves. I'm still part of the VA. The difference was I couldn't collect. You can't double dip. They won't let you collect your disability payment while serving as a Guard member. So like while I was deployed to Iraq as a reservist, after my time in the active infantry, I get out, go to the reserves. I'm in Iraq. My disability payment stopped. But that doesn't mean I'm not any longer part of the VA. It just means that I couldn't collect on that payment. You can still be part of the VA. You can still have that rating. You can still take advantage of those benefits like VRNE. You just can't double dip on things like disability payments, if that makes sense.
Also, VRB is Veteran Readiness and Employment. It was previously called Vocational Rehabilitation, just to clarify.
Yeah, and see, this is what happens when you get old, is that you start going by old nomenclature. Like it used to be called Voc Rehab when I first got out of the military. Now it's VRNE, and I automatically associate in my mind vocational rehab and employment because that makes sense. But the VA's got to throw a fast one on everyone. Amy asks, what do the hours typically look like? I'm assuming it's based on Central Time. Yes. So Central Time, Chicago time, 8:30 a.m. is generally the start time. I think that's about accurate still, Kayla, right? 8:30 a.m. ish.
Yeah, 8:30.
8:30 a.m. Central Time. Expect long hours every day. Official class time probably goes to 5:30. However, you can count on an hour to two after that, at least, that you're working on things. Depending, there's going to be times when you're done at 5 and you're set, but then there's going to be times when you might be struggling on a concept, and then there's times when something's going to be easy for you and it's going to be an easier day. That time after 5 o'clock is usually what's called instructor time, where you can sit with instructors one-on-one and they can help you with certain concepts, TAs who can help you with things. So we tell people in general, plan on 10 to 12-hour days. One of the first, because it really is a boot camp, like that's the idea. It's a boot camp experience. One of the first things that the executive director will say, if you're accepted to Code Platoon and you get on that welcome call, he will say, are you ready to give up your life for the next 3.5 months? Because if you're not, we need to have a conversation, because it really is a fully immersive experience and it's rewarding. Again, we're imparting a bachelor's degree worth of knowledge in 15 weeks. So it's going to be rewarding, but it is intense. And we don't want to lie about that and make you think otherwise. How do I get a disability rating? That's through the VA. So that's all VA. Like, you're going to have to, file that with the VA. They have a pretty step-by-step process outlined on that. If you have not started that process yet, I'm going to tell you right now, it is not a fast process. I'm not saying they've gotten better. That's been a big push with the VA over the last 2 years. Some congressional action happened, and there's a lot of improvements that have been made. So that will be faster than it was a couple of years ago. But it's also not like you're going to get a disability rating in, a week. It does take some time, but go through the VA's website, just Google VA disability. And obviously you do have to get on the VA's website if you're not already. I mean, that's step one, is to register on the VA, get your ID, get all of that set up, because you should have that anyway. Everyone here should have that, and start that process. But yeah, all of that will be handled through, because they're going to need medical records, they're going to need all that kind of stuff. That's not something that you want me messing, because I'd give you 100% right now. I'd just be like, yeah, this person deserves 100% because you served. I defer to that. So yeah, just Google VA disability rating, and they have some pretty solid step-by-step process pages on the VA's website that will show you how to do that. What typically is a 10% disability rate? Like, if you had literally any injury at all, you could get a 10% disability rating. Again, I can't speak to that. Like, I'm not going to tell you definitively, because we're getting into areas of like medical care, and I can't, like, way outside my scope of practice. I'm speaking to you in this context as a veteran to another veteran. It's a very low threshold to get a 10% rating, extremely low. So yeah, if you broke your ankle like ever in the past in your service, like anything like that, it's pretty simple. So as long as you have documentation. But like I said, that's getting way outside my scope, so I don't want to tell you definitively. Just go through I got 10% for shaving bumps. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that. But walk through that with the VA, and like I said, the processes are pretty well outlined now at this point on their website. They'll show you how to do that. Just make sure that you're documenting everything that you can. Any other questions? It's already been an hour. That went very quickly. Very quickly. Any questions about anything at all? I saw that we had somebody show up, maybe came in and left, and here again, if you missed all of this, it will be recorded and put on YouTube. We also have past iterations of the same Coffee and Code Platoon thing that we have on YouTube. So we've got plenty of material on there to answer your questions. But maybe more importantly, and I'll put it in the chat again, just so nobody is unaware, email me. My job at Code Platoon is to answer your questions. Like, that's really what I do here, is make sure that you have your questions answered, make sure you're aware of what we're doing. what it takes to become part of the program. Anything you need to know. Well, maybe not anything. I can't teach you JavaScript. I'll leave that to the instructors because I'm clueless. Anything else? Any other questions?
Owen, did you still want to stay back to talk to Greg individually, or did we cover everything?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. That would be just for a little bit so I can just reference a few things.
Sure. Sure. I'm happy to. Any questions from anyone else? Anything?
Seems like we don't. So, I think what I'll do, just so it feels sufficiently private for you, Owen, is I'll set up a breakout room and put you and Greg in there, and I'll just like hang out while y'all are in
Yeah,
there.
that sounds great.
Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, that'll work. Thanks to everybody else. Appreciate your time. And again, don't hesitate to email me if you have further questions. That's what I'm here for.